For sure.
I'd rather be in San Diego. It's been much weather. No, just like it's good to get away and then like to time it when like kids aren't on vacation because then it's a lot cheaper to travel. And you just go when it's like a random week in January and just spend time outside in the sun.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, as Julian may have emailed you, we are live streaming this. May we have your consent to do so?
That's a little bit nerve-wracking for me.
It's nerve-wracking for me as well.
I know. Okay.
Oh, you have a pen. Great. Would you like one anyway? Okay. Great. Welcome. I didn't know if you wanted this, but
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, if it comes.
if it comes up.
If it comes up, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Welcome. Did we get everyone? Great. Thank you so much.
Boy, if that's a major, I've never going to achieve that degree. My major is student loans. I feel like that's mine. I've got 2 kids on college. Oh my goodness. Are you really? Because it was just like it was in a field where it wasn't useful for me to have that degree. Like you're gonna take on like more debt, you're not gonna make more money, you're not gonna like necessarily have to like you. So like my partner is going to get a teaching degree. He has to have like that to have. But like it was very I was very happy to have somebody not encourage me to make like think about what you're signing up for before you respond.
My girls want to be med school.
Oh yeah, so they have to have that to please send me like
All right, everyone. I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome to the library, and thank you for coming. This is our very first in a series of critical conversations that we're having at the Pierce College Puyallup Library. I'm a reference and instruction librarian, and I have our wonderful panel to discuss food insecurity today. I want to emphasize that we are going to have more of these conversations later in the quarter, about once a month at the end of the month. And I think it's important to point out that we're having this in the library because often we think of the resources in a library as, and on a college campus, as books and videos and periodicals. And it's easy to forget that everybody walking around our campus is a resource of information of their own life experience and what they're bringing to this college. So really, these conversations are meant to bring us together to hear from experts, but to also experience what one another experience in relation to these topics. So thank you so much for coming. I am going to hand it over to Jonas, who is going to be facilitating our panel, and I really look forward to this conversation. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Jonas Upman. I'm the AmeriCorps Vista here at Pierce College. I'll be moderating this panel today, as Julian said. And one of my big roles on campus is actually staffing the mobile food banks that come onto both campuses on Mondays and Tuesdays, and also working with the student governments to make sure that their student pantries are filled with like one-time meals sort of a thing. But I'd first like to introduce our lovely panel here. We're going to start with Claire here from the Emergency Food Network, and let us kind of explain what you do.
Hi, so my name is Claire. I'm the development coordinator at Emergency Food Network. We are Pierce County's emergency food distributor, so we provide food at no cost to 82 food pantries, meal sites, and shelters in the county, including Nourish Pierce County, one of our best partners. And so our goal is that everybody in Pierce County has access to beautiful, nutritious food all of the time.
I'm Sue Potter. I'm with Nourish Pierce County, and we operate 26 food distribution sites throughout the county, serving last year 7% of the Pierce County population. 2 of our sites are Pierce College Fort Silicon and Pierce College Puyallup.
Hi, I'm Kurt Warmington. I teach English at the other Pierce College campus, or one of the other 3. I also am a union president and co-chair with Sabrina and Bill Orange, the Poverty Committee. I also work at our church with a community garden and a meal program that my wife runs.
My name is Sabrina Stevenson, and I'm the manager of the Peer Academic Support Services across the district. So that's mainly the tutoring and mentoring programs that you see on both the main campuses and also out at JBLM. As far as my personal experience with food insecurity, it's kind of near and dear to my heart because I was food insecure. I was a single mother going to school with 2 young boys, trying to work as many hours as I could and fit in school full time. And so there were obviously many times when I had to choose who got the nutritious meals, and most of the time, of course, that was my children. And just kind of learning how to make some really creative meals with really very little. Mm-hmm. And I took that and kind of wanted to make sure that I was giving back, and so my volunteer time has been spent in Boy Scouts, fish food banks, Poverty Committee, fundraising in all different kinds of ways, just to try to make sure that now that I am walking in privilege, that I can give back to those that are walking in the shoes that I have given up.
Well, that's great. It's good to hear. It's good to see all of you here. Really, Pierce College really appreciates all of you sitting at the panel. Why don't we go ahead and start with a working definition of food insecurity? Like, what does that mean to you as professionals and personally?
So the working definition that I have seen is being without consistent access to affordable and nutritious food. So I think a lot of times when we think of what hunger looks like, we think of people who have absolutely nothing to eat and are visibly starving. And I don't think that that is the working definition of how we see hunger in the United States. It might be that, you're deciding whether you eat ramen or like fast food, and instead of having healthy food, and then making decisions whether it's, do I pay my rent on time, or do I buy food for my family, or do I eat expired food? Do I water down my food to stretch it further? Finding those creative ways to make food stretch. And I think that's part of why hunger can be so invisible in our communities, because, you might think that you're going to be able to look at somebody and think, oh, this person is obviously food insecure because they are visibly starving, but that's not necessarily the case of what we see here.
Yeah.
1 in 7 in Pierce County are food insecure. 1 in 5 of those are a kid 18 and under. And in my simplistic terms, it's just flat out not knowing where your next meal is going to come from. Constantly moving, constantly looking for that next meal. Sabrina brought up a good point. A lot of our clients are the the working poor, as United Way terms it, asset limited, income constrained employed. We call them ALICE. People who have jobs but are having to make that tough decision between food for the family or the mortgage payment or the car repair and food. And it's very often the parent who is sacrificing their own health and nutrition by giving the meal to their child, but not having consistent food enough for the whole household every day. And it's a sad epidemic in the United States that can be cured. That's the good news of it, but we got to get creative and cure it.
I would just add that I would say some more about children and food insecurity. I think one of the sad things at Clover Park School District, where Pierce and Lakewood, Fort Steilacoom is located, 72%, depends on the year, are on free and reduced lunches. And breakfasts often are served as well. And there are schools in that district which are pretty much 100% free and reduced lunches. Those students, you know, I don't know how you felt going to school, but those students usually are feeling like they need to go to school because they don't know what they're going to have when they get home. And summers and holidays and weekends are all, you know, really difficult times for them.
The healthy versus cheap for me is nearly an epidemic. When you go to the grocery store, take a look at the healthy food and then go price processed food. And you'll see the difference between what it means to have $10 to get a week's worth of groceries. What can you buy with that? You can buy a whole lot of processed cheap food. You can buy a whole lot of pasta. Spaghetti goes a long way. Rice goes a long way. But how nutritious is it when you can't put anything on it except the sauce because you can't afford the meat? So food insecurity for me, you know, we could go to food banks, but often what was at the food banks was those free kinds of things. It was those really, really cheap kinds of things. I relied on the donation and the grace of others, but when the donations are typically, again, the very least healthy foods, and they're all canned and boxed. You don't get a lot of grocery items like meats and fresh produce and fresh vegetables. So when you lack those kinds of things, I know we're going to talk about this more, but not only is there the hunger, but there's also frequent illnesses that happen, the inability to focus and concentrate. And when you see that in your children, it's pretty devastating. There's one thing with shame and pride, but to see that happening to your kids, it's a whole nother level of shame.
Building off of that, are there any sort of common misconceptions or myths that you would like to kind of tackle in this panel right now?
The one that I would like to hear more about, I'd never heard the term ALICE, but I can tell you that working poor definition. One common misconception was, if you're poor, you must not be working. You should be able to go out and get a job. You know, why? I often the question I got was, why are you going to school instead of working more hours? Because without an education, I could work more hours, but I was always going to be poor if I was working without anything more than a high school education. So I was trying to suffer through those years in order to provide better for my kids so that we could get off subsidies, we could get off WIC, we could get off all of those different programs that were under DSHS. And you have to be able to have a little extra help to get through that. So
Kind of playing along that, the folks that you see at the food pantries, and we see over 65,000 people every year come through a Nourish site at least one time. Most people visit on average 6 to 7 times, and I guarantee you, if you were to come, you would say, wow, that's my neighbor. It's not a stranger. They're just normal people like us who need a helping hand. And they come to the food bank, they muster up all the gumption they can because getting out of your car at a food bank is a tough thing to do. But they are your neighbors. We see school teachers. I live in Lakewood. I'm very familiar with the Clover Park School District and the issues there. It's not uncommon in Franklin Pierce or Bethel school districts. It's prevalent throughout the county. The myth I'd like to start to shatter is that food banks who are following best practices, and you'll be happy to know this, are really, really working hard to make sure that we have fresh produce, fresh meats, fresh fruits, and fresh vegetables available. We are trying to move away from the processed foods. We don't always control what comes in through government commodities or that sort of thing, and Claire can attest to this because they too are trying to provide us with nutritious food. But we really are looking at the health spectrum for all of our clients because we know when you're food insecure, there's also underlying issues usually that come up around health and wellness. So you are what you eat. We want to give our clients healthier foods. So that's the trajectory that those who are trying to follow best practices are going on. And you'll hopefully hear more about that as we all evolve and get more corporations and donors involved in helping us achieve that goal.
So I was just looking over our data from last year, and last year was the first year since I started working at EFN, so in 5 years, that we actually saw our total client visits increase. They had been kind of on a decline for a few years, and last year they went up. So when you hear numbers about like how low the unemployment level is right now, or how well the stock market is doing, yes, those numbers are true, but who are they actually working for? And even if people are working, are they working enough hours to afford their basic needs? And the answer is not necessarily. Rent in Puyallup went up 7% from last year. And if your employer is only giving you a 2% cost of living raise, at some point, your expenses are going to outweigh your income. And so I think the biggest myth is that food insecurity either doesn't exist or it only happens to certain people, and that's just not true.
Question, what do you attribute that increase in your client and your survey? What do you attribute that to? Or can you?
So the question was attributing the increase in client. I think part of it is just that, we expanded our partnership with Nourish last year, and so now Nourish has an even larger reach in the community with their mobile that is now going to the community colleges in our community, which is really, really wonderful. So we were working with more partners, but I think it too is just that the cost of living is going up. Rent across the board is far more expensive than it has been, and people's wages just aren't growing with that, and all of our basic needs are becoming more expensive, but wages aren't rising with it.
Rent, childcare, an aging population. I know we see 17% of our customers are seniors, and they might be living off of retirement or pensions and whatnot, and their costs are increasing, health care is increasing, child care is increasing for the younger families. We just can't keep up with that inflation. But I will say in 2008, when we had the Great Recession, Nourish's numbers, which used to be fish food banks, our numbers went up by 132%. So we more than doubled just in 2008. And ever since then, we've backed down a little bit every year, but we're still up over double what we were prior to the recession. And this year was the first year where we saw double-digit growth, or last year I should say, in the number of people coming out. Part of that had to do with the economic just the cost of living and lack of wage increases. The other part had to do is we've just reached out much, much farther into the county and are going to more places in need, now serving at Salishan neighborhood for Tacoma Housing Authority, all the technical and community colleges to help address student hunger, and farther out into Parkland and the Bethel school districts and remote regions of the county.
I just add that, yeah, you can't tell if someone is going to be food insecure by looking at them. And we have 60% of our classes are taught by adjunct faculty who make a little over $30,000 a year, and if you, on average, and if you know something about the cost of living around here, that doesn't work very well. And I guess I might also add my church, the church that my wife and family I go to, is has a food bank, and I'm struck by the people. As I said, they're our neighbors, but I'm struck by how many are in fatigues, how many folks are coming from the military bases, and yeah, it's just you can't tell.
I'm going to kind of speed up the questions here a little bit. So kind of going off the topic of food insecurity on college campuses. In a 2009 survey of nearly 50,000 two-year college students conducted by the Hope Center, almost half, roughly 23,000 people, were found to have low or very low food security. Could you talk about what that looks like on two-year campuses and what efforts are being made to specifically help students?
So I see it in two different, from two different views. I see it in the classroom and out of the classroom, because I also teach College 110, College Success, and so I'm seeing a lot of entry-level college students. And I also see it from our tutoring centers, so students that come in and out of our centers and seek our tutoring and mentoring services. And how that looks to me in the different ways in the classroom, I see students' difficulties focusing, maintaining concentration, with retention. You can often see the retention of knowledge, so your memory is affected when you have frequent hunger, and a lot of missed class. And from my understanding and my own experience, it comes from frequent illnesses, because you have a lowered immune system when you don't have proper nutrition. So you're getting lots of headaches. You're coming down with every bug that floats around because you have a compromised immune system. So now you're missing class. So you're missing class frequently. You have difficulty staying focused when you're trying to do your homework, and when you are engaged in the learning, whether that's with a group or by your instructor. And all of those things combined just make you feel like, why am I even here? So then you are plagued by that doubt, as if school isn't hard enough anyway. So it's just, that's a lot to bear, and it all becomes very toxic stress. I know there's healthy stress and there's toxic stress, and that definitely becomes on the level of toxic stress.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to be a professor and want to tell your students, you got to be here and you've got to do this work with us and all that, and then, also know that they're struggling with knowing if they're going to have enough food for their children that day. I think I was blessed to not have to go through those kinds of struggles when I was a student, but I think we need to do some more things to make it easier for our students to get their needs met and be able to realize whatever goals and aspirations they have as students. So yeah, it's just knowing that sometimes my students don't tell me, but I can sort of see that there are things going on, and sometimes it's food insecurity.
So to concur with what they've all said, what's being done right now, I'll just speak from my corner of the world at Nourish, with a partnership with EFN and the community and technical colleges in the area. We've deployed our mobile food bank, which many of you may have seen. It is it's a grocery store on wheels. We work to provide dignity to our customers by letting them pick the products, the food that meets their needs. That said, I'm still hearing from the colleges and even high schools that they need meals right now. We provide them with the ingredients to cook nutritious meals, but students need meals right now. And that's a harder issue to address without looking at those processed foods, the cup of noodles, the grab and go granola bars that are nothing but sugar, that sort of thing. So that is an area that still needs to be addressed and still needs to be worked on in collaboration with food providers or emergency food providers as well as the colleges themselves. Question?
So that makes me think of the food service that's available on campus. Are they part of this conversation, or?
The question is, are food services that are serving the campuses available as a part of this conversation? And to my knowledge, not right now.
One thing that I think is really important to highlight about the Nourish Mobile is like the importance of bringing services to areas where people are already spending their time. I think we all realize that there are limited hours in a day, so getting from school to work to family is all very complicated, especially if you're taking the bus and then getting to a food bank on top of that. I was visiting with one of our food bank partners one day and I was chatting with a client, and she said that she had traveled 2 hours by bus to get from Lakewood, where she was a nanny, to Tacoma to get to the food bank that was in her neighborhood, then to go home to prepare that food for her family. And so I think just bringing services onto a campus where then it's one less thing that students or faculty have to get to in their day. It's just walking, 5 or 10 minutes instead to the mobile to get those services. So the more services that we can bring to a campus and to where people are already spending their time just takes one less barrier off of their plate.
So we're kind of changing gears, like looking into the future. Are there any particularly innovative approaches that really excite you about tackling food insecurity?
One thing that we're doing that's new is we have what's called a hub on our website that is a consolidation point for resources. So that we're trying to pay attention to the fact that the majority of students that are failing, that drop out of school, that are not succeeding in the areas that they want, they're not achieving the grades that they want, it's most often not due to content or lack of understanding content. It's really due to life. It's due to all the other things like food insecurity, lack of childcare, so on and so forth. So one of the things that we're doing is trying to provide as many resources and information about resources as possible. So that hub is a one-stop shop location on the website that they can go to, and they can just click on childcare and get childcare information. They can click on food and get information about when the food trucks are coming, where the local food banks are, other places. They may not even know we have a food closet, that's on each campus, things like that. It's about getting the information to them. That's been one of the barriers that I've seen. Because if the information is not readily available for them to explore on their own, then you've put the person in the position where they have to ask. And there's a pride, that stigma that we were talking about. There's a shame that comes with having to reach out and ask somebody, do you know of anywhere where I can get food? Do you know anywhere where I can, get low-cost childcare or help with my bills? When they have to ask for the information, it puts all of the burden on the individual who's already well overburdened. So when you can provide open and easy access to that individual for the resources that they need, whether it's information about food, the food closets that are just free and open to anyone. We don't ask you to fill out a form. We don't ask you to, come and knock on the door and say, is this where I can get food? It's just open, and any student can go and grab what they need. And that was a point of contention and debate for a long time. What if other students are getting food that don't really need it? And I think we decided, I don't care. If that preserves a little bit of pride for individuals who are already struggling, and then I don't care if somebody gets an extra box of ramen or what package of peanut butter. So.
We had a question online. One of the students was asking about, I had a comment about ways that we can bridge gaps where there's incomplete knowledge of foods and food types that are healthy for them. And are there ways that you guys are communicating and disseminating that information so they can make better choices? And then how to then acquire those foods without breaking the bank as food habits?
So I think one of the most exciting things that I see happening in the food banking system are colorful cooking made easy demonstrations, which is a partnership with us and United Way of Pierce County and the health department. And it was kind of modeled after the TV show Chopped, where volunteers will go in and they'll look and see what is available in the food pantry that day, and then they will use very limited cooking tools and equipment to try to make a healthy meal out of that product so that people can taste it and see how you can make a healthy meal out of what's available. One of our favorite stories was there was a significant amount of arugula, which I love arugula, but if you're not familiar with arugula, it might be a little, I mean, it can taste kind of soapy, frankly, but I think it's good. And so it was really hard to move that arugula, and so the volunteer made an arugula pesto and served it with other like carbs that were available that day, and then the arugula flew off the shelves. So I think showing people how to use what is available and use like vegetables that might be available that they're not familiar with, and just, you know, teaching people those cooking skills is a really good way to use food that is available at the food pantry in an innovative way.
In addition to the colorful cooking program, Nourish has partnered with Washington State University Food Sense. It's part of their extension program for over 15 years now, and we do our very best to work with them to provide nutritional information just like a grocery store would next to the produce or next to certain items on the shelves, including recipes and tastings, and also some work to cross cultural barriers where some of the food is just quite honestly foreign to some of the folks who visit the food bank, and to try to make it more relatable so that they know that even though it might be in a can, it's actually nutritious. So that's some of the work we're doing to answer and address those questions. Can I speak a little bit about the innovative approaches,
Please do.
which was your first question?
Please do.
There's a couple things going on now that I've been reading about that I'm excited about. One is because it is now nationally recognized that college kids everywhere are struggling with food insecurity, there are some really larger but leading universities that are now addressing this at an administrative level, meaning they are putting aside or figuring out how to put aside funds to help the food insecurity issue. And they're either using those funds for innovative programs on campuses or using it to support partner agencies like Nourish, who need those funds to come out and solve the problem for them. But one of the interesting programs I read about recently is taking place at San Jose State. They have a vendor, a contractor, who comes in to do all their cafeteria services. And now they have an app that this vendor has created where students can sign up, and when there are leftover food, leftover meals, leftover food available, an alert will go out to any student who signed up, and they can go and accept that food. And to me, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's a great use of technology because everybody's got a smartphone, but it's also something that could be applied, if the government would loosen some regulations, to our public schools, and where school cafeterias can repack meals, send that alert out to any student or any parent who might be food insecure, and it prevents the food going into the landfill and feeds people who really need it. Question?
I was just going to say, this has been a pet peeve of mine for many, many years on in-service days and college days that we have, that Pierce College employees are fed. What happens to that leftover food? And I know that there are some regulations that once you serve it, then you can't serve it again, but there's just so much food waste, and I have a hard time with that. But it would be lovely if we could figure out a way to make that food go to good use. Yeah.
I thought of a couple things. One thing I think to address the online question is using, you look at those continuing ed classes. There's some really wonderful classes that are offered that are non-credit, but lots of great cooking classes and helpful nutritional information. St. Leo's has, I think it's still up and running, but they were just getting a canning program together a couple of years ago. And, one of the problems is that during the dark days of winter, it's hard to get something fresh. But if you can it, then you've got that nutrition, at least most of it, preserved for the season. Yeah, you had some.
I was just going to let Beth know that anytime that we have food anywhere on campus that is portable, meaning maybe not the eggs that are left over in a big container, but if there's breads, if there's cookies, if there's tortillas, if there's anything at all that is portable, we often will take it up into the tutoring centers and give it to students. We have a hospitality table in each of our tutoring centers that has a microwave and a hot pot, hot water pot, and a coffee pot always going at all times. And so frequently we are like the place that people know, like international programs, whenever they have an event, they have the most amazing foods because it's usually potlucked, and so it's brought in by all of their international students. So I've tasted the most amazing foods. But anytime they have everything, anything left over, they always bring it over to the tutoring center, and then it goes on our hospitality table, and any student can partake of it. And so the students kind of know that that's a place to go, and if we've ever got something, it's completely free. And again, it's one of those open access places. Nobody has to ask for it. They know if it's on the hospitality table, it's up for grabs. So we do that.
And I would just add that there are rules about the food, but if you know that there's some kind of event going on and you know about when it ends and you're not going to the event, there's nothing that says you can't go down and take the food because it's going to be wasted anyway. Go down and take the food and put it, give it to somebody who needs it, and I think that's fine.
My comment actually touches to both this discussion of like what happens to food after events and then innovation. So food rescue is something that is really important to EFN, and the way that we're doing this right now is mostly with the fresh produce that we have access to. At this point, about 40% of the food that's produced in the United States ends up going to landfill, and that's either at the production side of things or, in your home when you're going through your refrigerator at the end of the week and realize, oh, I bought more broccoli than I needed and now it has to go to waste. And that is a travesty for the environment, and it's a travesty when we consider all the people in our community who don't have access to food. So a lot of the ways that we get produce now is if there is, a semi-truck load of produce where a portion of that load is bad and it's the whole load then is going to be wasted, we can go in and get that load, bring it back to EFN, and with our volunteers and our staff sort through that so that hopefully what we're giving to Sue is then the high quality stuff. We can get rid of the stuff that is not usable, and instead of that whole load going to waste, only a portion of it is going to waste. The hot food is a whole other issue. We dream of a day when we could, go to a hotel after a conference and go to the Greater Tacoma Convention Center after a conference and take any of that hot food that they have left over. But frankly, that is just something that I don't think any of us are equipped for at this point. I think that's a whole other agency that would need to have the ability to take that food when it's at temp, cool it or store it properly, and then distribute it to meal sites or other places. We would love to see that happen, but our happy little niche right now is, like the cold things or the produce that is much easier to safely then collect and transport.
I will say, though, and a shout out to the Hotel Murano in downtown Tacoma, when they have a large group coming in, they're aware of this waste and the need in the community. And so now when they have an event, I'm making it up, but let's say they guarantee 400 meals for that event, but the folks putting on the event say, well, we're really only going to have 300. The hotel's already bought the food for the 400. And now, instead of preparing all those meals and throwing away 100 good meals, the hotel is now being more proactive and going back to their clients and saying, hey, we have the raw ingredients. Do you mind if we donate it to a food bank? So we've been receiving those donations, and when we say you can't get steak at a food bank, it's pretty much true, but every now and again, thanks to the Hotel Murano, we can.
I think I would like to ask one last question before we have a really brief Q&A and then break out into small groups and discuss what we've been talking about today. I think this is a really important question. What are some ways that attendees of this conversation can get involved with this issue?
I'll start here. First of all, there are food banks all around, and you folks know exactly where all their locations are. But you can volunteer at those food banks, and usually there's a short training period, and then you'll figure out where your talents are, and they'll put you someplace where you can do the most good. And I know people that do that all the time. I used to do it quite often, but more rarely now, since I'm working with my wife's meal program. We do hot meals every Friday at our church, and those are other kinds of things that you can look into. There are hot meal programs all around the county as well, and we're always looking for help. So if you want to do that, you can contact me, and if you're my student, you'll get extra credit. So. And then if you happen to be a gardener, the community gardens, there are gleaning programs all around as well, and those gleaning programs, will harvest maybe several trees worth of pears or whatever it is that would go to waste, and then get those to a food bank or someplace where they can do the most good.
Two ideas come to mind. One is share. So share your ideas, share your resources. So there's a lot of people in this room right now, and you may know of a resource that we haven't even talked about. And if you know about it, but you're the only one that knows about it, then you're keeping that to yourself and not sharing that. So share your knowledge, share your resources. Maybe you're someone who can start a free cooking class. Maybe you've learned how to shop and cook on a shoestring budget. Share that. Offer to host those classes through Student Life or something, So I would say share your knowledge and your resources is the first thing. And the other is go through your cupboards. I can tell you right now, if I went through my cupboards right now, I would find food that's not expired, but I haven't used it in a couple of weeks. And it's probably the back, because everything you're looking at and everything you're using is in the front. So go through your cupboards and pull out the things before they're expired and donate them, rather than waiting until after they're expired when you have to throw them away.
Advocate. When you read in the paper about cuts in SNAP, which is the food stamp program, or cuts in WIC, changes there that are going to impact a lot of people, advocate. We're fortunate in Washington State where we have a congressional delegation that's supportive of feeding people. But even if they're supportive, they need to hear our voice so that they have the ammunition they need to go fight for their constituents. So when you read in the paper about SNAP cuts, if you don't understand it, go to Feeding America's webpage or Food Lifeline in Seattle, their webpage, and read the advocacy issues. They drill it down very cleanly, and just email or call your representative or your senator and let them know you're against these cuts in helping the hungry, or you're for breakfast before the bell. Whatever program it might be, we need your advocacy, even to those people who are our champions.
Possibly add to that.
Yeah.
First of all, I must preface this in saying I have lots of sympathy and empathy in terms of the work you're doing. It's incredible. But in terms of advocacy, I think it's also important to let people in the local community know that this idea of self-reliance is a mythology that's very problematic in terms of them actually being able to do things for themselves. Because first of all, this idea of quote unquote, and I apologize ladies, the self-made man is an absolute travesty. The reality is people have always been relying on other people in terms of making it and essentially succeeding in their lives. And the idea of people not having food and essentially being shamed in terms of not being able to provide food for themselves is absolutely ludicrous, because the reality is it is a basic necessity in terms of life. And I say this, and I think the best way to sort of promote it to these people is to let them know, go to a grocery outlet and buy a peach there. And then go to either a Whole Foods or Trader Joe's and buy a peach there and see the difference regarding quality. If they know that they're in a system that is unequal and essentially geared towards people who have money and have the means to live well, then they might recognize maybe I need assistance in terms of this. So this idea of advocacy is good, but the same time, we need to break this sort of cultural problem in terms of people not recognizing that sometimes they need assistance.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just echoing that, I think challenging people's comments or assumptions or beliefs that people who need assistance are not trying or not working hard enough, and calling people in for the opportunity to change when they say things like that, because 100% the people who are getting assistance, it's not that they are doing all the wrong things, that is, we as a system that doesn't encourage people to move up. Another thing that I think is really important to do, especially this year, is to participate in the census. It is a once every 10-year opportunity, and it is going to change the representation that we get on a congressional level. It impacts the funding that we have available to us. And college students are actually typically underrepresented, mostly because I think they don't know, are my parents answering the census for me, or am I answering the census for myself? So make sure that you get counted, because that is so important to the resources that we get as a community and as a state.
I think we have about 7 minutes left. I'm going to try and keep the questions kind of short, hopefully. Maybe time for 2 or 3. Does anyone have any in the audience? Any questions? Comments?
Well, maybe just kind of building off of the last line of talking here about breaking those myths of self-reliance and normalizing reaching out for assistance. What's feedback that you have gotten from clients, like when clients come into the mobile food truck or to other spaces? Do some of them share, like, I hesitated to come, but then X happened, and that's what got me through the door? What feedback do you hear?
She was asking what feedback do we hear from clients when they come through the door about what brought them there or what got them to that point. We do get feedback. People voluntarily sometimes share their stories about, and very often,
what brought them there or what got them to that point.
I'm trying to think
We
how
do
to
get
address
feedback.
this
People
clearly for you.
voluntarily
Very often
sometimes
share
share
their stories
about
and very often
what brought them there or
friends to know I need assistance.
but
I'm trying to think
we
how
do
to
get
address
feedback.
this
People
clearly and my mortgage and feed myself. Or I'm getting SNAP. I get $30 a month for my family of 6, and it's just not enough. And we work, but it's just not enough. And these are clients who aren't living in fancy neighborhoods. These are clients who are living in, affordable housing through THA or some other Pierce County Housing Authority or low rent areas. I'm not sure if, am I addressing your question? But the stories we hear are from all over the board, from a temporary layoff from a Boeing employee, a subcontractor of Boeing who built a part for X airplane. They're no longer building that airplane, or they've moved that plant to someplace else, and now that subcontractor is out of work and all those people are laid off. They've had steady employment for 20 or 30 years, and suddenly they're finding they're having to make tough decisions around food, and they need us to get by for a few months until they can find another job and not disrupt their family's life, not disrupt the kids or add the stress to the kids. We hear a lot around medicine. Just can't afford my insulin, can't afford my heart medicine, can't afford my child care. Just having to make tough everyday choices. Does that address it for you?
Yeah, it was kind of, what I'm reading there, or what I'm hearing there is kind of like, honestly, desperation is what forced me through the door.
Right.
I was kind of asking more, do clients ever share, like, I was hesitant to come here.
Oh, absolutely.
But then someone said this, or I saw this, and
Right.
that's what prompted me to, like, get out, to come here and get out of the car.
Right. Very often people are hesitant to come to the food bank, and either it's desperation and they just get the gumption and go themselves. And then once they realize when they come into our food banks that we don't ask them a ton of questions, we don't make them prove they're hungry. If they show up, we're going to feed them. And our volunteers are very friendly, and it's like a neighborhood hug, if you will. And you can pick the food you want. Once they get out of the car and come in, there's this sense of, this is going to be okay. and they're going to be here next week, and I can come back, and this is going to be okay. But very often it's a church prompting them to go, or a friend who maybe volunteered or was a past client. It's a lot of word of mouth. Or just looking it up on EFN's webpage about where they can get services and just sucking it up and getting out of the car. I mean, that's a lot of it.
Yeah.
One of the things that we hear a lot in the tutoring center, because our mentors are working with students trying to provide these life resources that they need outside the classroom. And it speaks very much to what the gentleman was saying in regards to it's a societal, cultural, not worse than misunderstanding. It's something that needs to be completely broken down, because one of the things that we hear is, I don't want to be judged. I feel like I don't want anyone to know. I don't want my professor to know. I don't want even my advisors to know. Anyone in a position of authority, they don't want their classmates to know. I don't want to be judged because they'll judge me. They'll look at me differently. I want them to see me just like any other student, just like them. And it comes from that societal pressure that you're not supposed to need any help. And you hear phrases like, why don't they just pull themselves up by the bootstraps? You know, if I hear that one more time, I'm going to scream. I have boots and they don't have straps, but I can tell you what I can do with them, and it's not pulling myself up by them. We were in a single parent focus group last year, and an individual asked, as the parent of twins was reciting, you know, I have to choose between doing my laundry, buying food, or paying my rent. And this is on a monthly basis, because I always have to make this decision because it's always going to be the same. And the person who was not a participant, but a person like us who was a professional in the group, asked, didn't anyone ever go over a plan with you in the beginning? When you started college, didn't they talk about a financial plan? I mean, are we doing you a disservice by not discussing a financial plan? Were you not prepared? And the student just looked at him and looked at her children and said, yeah, I had a plan, but I have kids. I'm a single parent. Do you think my plans ever actually, happen? Life happens. It wasn't in my plan. My kids got sick. It wasn't in my plan. Lost my job. That wasn't in my plan. There's that in time things that happen, best laid plans. We've all heard that phrase. Well, yeah, best laid plans. But when someone judges you and says, well, didn't you have a plan? Weren't you prepared for this? That's the judgment that they're afraid of. Yeah.
Out of respect for everyone's time, it is now 12:50, and we are now going to conclude our panel today. But I would like to give a very big round of applause for our panel today. They were incredible. And thank all of you for coming by today as well. Really appreciate you turning out for this. Thank all of you.
I have two things before everybody scatters to the wind. The first is I have, if I can find it, a little survey
Here.
to fill out about this event. That's the tedious, menial thing I have for you to do. And then the second thing that I hope we all can find time to do today is think about the ways that the panel talked about that we can get involved with this issue, or think about a goal that you might have in relation to this issue, and close your eyes or just spend a minute thinking about that today, how you could actually realize that, and what that would look like for the people that it would affect.
Okay,
But also this survey.
while they're thinking, can I plant one positive word?
Please.
Because I want to try to end and summarize all of this in one positive word. It's been gnawing at me ever since we started, and that word is community. That's the way that this is going to happen. That's the way it's going to change. That's the way we're going to serve and lead. That's the way we're going to support and get rid of that stigma. It all centers really around community. Are we creating community?
Not to get the last word, but vote.
Yeah.
Vote.
Yes.
And Emily called me out on being a terrible librarian, but we do have, both online, we've got a LibGuide on this topic, and we've also got a book display out at the front of the library on food insecurity if you want to read more about this issue as well. So yes, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank all of you for coming.